Okay, so thank you very much and good morning. I'm going to talk about mathematics, but first you immediately realize that mathematicians are strange people. They still use boards. And in fact, you have to know that most often they use even blackboards with chalks. It is, yeah. Okay. So today, what I want to give to you an idea about is the importance and the power of simple things in mathematics. So it is something which is mysterious and wonderful, even for mathematicians. So I will give to you several examples. In fact, they will form a sequel. The first example I can give, and I'm sure everybody will understand, is the following. It is certainly one of the most important concepts, simple concepts in history for the development of mathematics. So I write it. So here it is. It is the zero. So this is something which, for instance, Greek mathematicians didn't know. So for European people, for European science, in fact, it came from India. And a good exercise for mathematicians, but also for representatives of other sciences or for engineers, is to imagine what would be left of mathematics and science if we didn't have the zero. And so it is difficult to imagine because we use it all the time, either explicitly or implicitly. So as a mathematician, I can say that almost all mathematics I know would be impossible to phrase without the concept of zero. Or maybe some could be phrased, but with in such an intricate way that maybe mathematicians would never have thought about developing these things. And so here I have a question I shall ask to my fellow mathematicians here after the talk. Imagine we would not have that. We would not have the zero. So the mathematics would not at all be developed as it is today. We would have Greek mathematics. Okay. And then, suppose a young student proposes a paper for publication, a one-page paper. And he says, I propose to introduce a new notation, this one. And the meaning of this notation is that A equals B is equivalent to A minus B equals 0. So then my question for fellow mathematicians is, would this paper be accepted for publication? So, okay. So you see, the difficulty is the following. By now, we all know that the zero is extremely important. We know that because an incredible amount of mathematics has been developed using this notion. But if it had not been introduced, it would be difficult for mathematicians to figure out quickly that such a concept can give rise to a huge amount of new mathematics. So when a new concept is introduced in mathematics, it can happen that for its importance is understood with a delay, for instance. Yesterday, in his talk, which I enjoyed a lot, yes? Oh, the black one? So this one? Yeah, okay. So yesterday, in his talk, Professor Zelmanov told about Galois and the invention of groups. And he said that this is the golden standard of beauty, and I would also add power in mathematics. And I entirely agree with that statement. And so, in fact, the definition of a group of symmetries is not explicitly written in the few pages of the letter of Galois, but it was when people began to read these pages and try to understand them, they realized that there was implicitly a new notion, the notion of group. And this notion proved incredibly powerful for mathematics. I remember, for instance, one of my colleagues says all the time that the notion of group is a miracle of mathematics. So group is the mathematical formulation of something everybody knows, which is the notion of symmetry. So, for instance, if I draw this picture, this triangle, then, so this is an equilateral triangle. So everybody understands that this drawing is very symmetric, even if you are not a mathematician, even if you are not a scientist. By the way, in fact, the word symmetry belongs to the common language. It does not only belong to the language of mathematicians or scientists. But what mathematicians have done, what Galois has done, is to put words on that by understanding abstractly what are the properties of the notion of symmetry. And I can write these properties. In any situation in mathematics, you usually have a family of symmetries. Okay, so usually you will write that with the letter G because of the name group. And the important features are that, first, there is a composition law. So what does it mean? It means that if we have two symmetries, G1 and G2, we can associate to them a composed symmetry. For instance, on this picture, for instance, you have rotations. You see, what are the symmetries? There are the rotations of angle 2p divided by 3, and there are the symmetries with respect to the 3-axis. So there are 6 symmetries, and you can compose them. A symmetry is something which respects the structure. It is the transform of the object you are talking about, which respects it. And so you can compose. So the second thing is that there is, in this family of symmetries, a very important one, in fact the most important one, which is the symmetry which does not transform anything, the so-called identity symmetry. So here, you just have this picture and you don't change anything. So it may seem absurd to talk about this one because it doesn't do anything. But in fact, usually, for instance, you can denote it 1, or you can denote, 1. But in fact, it is very important not to forget it. For instance, if you forget it, if you remove it from your family because you say it's not interesting, then there is no more a general composition law. It is not true in general that the composite of two symmetries is a symmetry, because it can happen that you may have two symmetries here, different from the identity symmetry, but whose composed symmetry is identity. So it is absolutely necessary to have one. And if you forget one, for instance, you cannot formulate group theory. In fact, you see, 3 minutes ago, I explained that the zero is at the basis of the bigger part of mathematics, but after the zero, maybe the most important concept is one. Okay, and the last very important thing, the last formal feature, is that when you have a symmetry, you can associate to it its converse. So, for instance, if you consider the rotation of angle 2 pi divided by 3, the converse is the rotation of angle minus 2 pi divided by 3. Okay, so here, what I have written here is, for mathematicians or logicians, the so-called language of the theory of groups. So you see, in this language, you have one letter, you have one composition law, you have a so-called unit element, and you have a map which associates to any symmetry its converse. Okay? And then there are properties, axioms, say mathematicians, which define the notion of group. So what are the axioms? So first, there is the fact that the composition law is so-called associative. So what does it mean? It means that if you consider three symmetries, then you immediately realize there are two ways of composing them. You first compose the two symmetries here, and then you compose the result with the symmetries there. But you can also compose first these two symmetries, and then compose the result with G1. But you remark that here and there, the order of the elements is the same. And so, the first property we require is this property. And it is always verified by symmetries. The second property, which is a defining property for the identity symmetry, is the fact that for any symmetry G, one composed with G is G. And it is also equal to G composed with 1. And the last property is that for any element G, the composed of this element with its converse is 1. And it is also the composed in the other way. Okay, so here, of course, for people who study mathematics, I don't even talk about mathematicians. This is, you know that by heart. And for others, maybe this is mathematics, so you already feel afraid. But the point I want to make is that this definition is surprisingly short. You see, here I have not hidden anything. I have just, so you see, Professor Zelmanov yesterday has told about the theory of groups. So he didn't define a group. So here I give the definition, and I really give the full definition. So you see, it is extraordinarily simple. You just, for the language, you have 4 elements. So G, composition law, unit element, converse map, and for the you have 3 axioms. So it is extremely simple. And so it is baffling that such a simple definition can be so powerful. Okay, so here maybe I will make a parenthesis. Because of another talk yesterday, which is a talk by Professor Cohen-Tanuji. And in fact, I do this parenthesis as an advice for students in mathematics. So at the beginning of the talk of Professor Cohen-Tanuji, he spoke about conservation laws in physics. And so here I want to say a few words about that, because there is a result, a mathematical result, by a mathematician, in fact a female mathematician, Emmy Noether. And the result I want to mention is 100 years old. So what is this result? It is an incredibly general and simple result. So it is in the context of the so-called Lagrange formalism, or you can also say it in the context of the so-called Hamilton formalism. So it is an extremely general formalism for physical theories. So in fact, there are physical theories which cannot be phrased with this general Lagrange or Hamilton setting, so I don't say what it is. But most theories in physics, still today, can be phrased in these terms. So it is really incredible. And so what Emmy Noether has proved is that in this extremely general context, which applies to most theories in physics, then there is an equivalence between conservation laws and symmetries. So it is not an analogy, it is a theorem. And the theorem can be, in its simplest form, can be proved in just 3 pages or 2 pages. And it uses very basic facts of mathematics. So a first-year university student in mathematics can understand that. And here, I really advise everyone to know that, every student in mathematics to learn that, both Lagrange or Hamilton formalism and the proof by Emmy Noether of this result. It is an example, another example, here of a result which is almost trivial, as we say, which means extremely simple, okay, not a complicated proof. Here you can prove that in just even a few lines. So trivial, but genius. In fact, I remember a quote by Einstein saying that this result was one of the greatest achievements in the history of science. And in fact, you have to know that Emmy Noether was not at all a physicist. She was a mathematician. And she wrote that paper of 1918 as in some sense, an exercise and a distraction from her main work. Her main work was in algebra and number theory. So for her, it was not important. But I was also told by fellow theoretical physicists, I am not at all a theoretical physicist, but I listened to them, and I was told by several of them that today maybe half of theoretical physics is based on that theorem. Okay, so this is just an illustration. You see the notion of symmetry here. And you may understand that conservation laws, for instance, yesterday, Professor Koentanuji spoke first about the conservation of momentum. Okay. So by now, I want to show you that the history of not only of the theory of groups, but even the definition of groups is not finished. And that mathematicians have proposed later, after Galois, other definitions, which in some sense are variations of the definition of a group. And so here I want to talk about the notion of category. So this is, of course, don't be afraid. Okay, so this notion, I think, was introduced, you see, during the war in the US by two mathematicians. So I write their name, Eilenberg and MacLean. And from the point of view of mathematicians, it is an extremely simple definition and extremely natural, which means when you learn this definition, you immediately realize that there are categories everywhere. There are many more categories than groups. So what it is? Let's come back to our drawing. So here I had made this drawing, and I had told you that here there are 6 symmetries. But there are also triangles without any non-trivial symmetry. But when we have this notion of groups, there is something which is not completely satisfactory. It is the fact that, you see, we are making different drawings on the plane, but when we want to talk about the symmetries of the different drawings, we are isolating the drawings one from the other, which after all is not natural. Because, you see, all these drawings are on the plane, and they can have relations. For instance, if you have 2 triangles like this, so here I have written, so let's, I write a bigger triangle like that. So, for instance, what I could imagine to do, and it is certainly something which would be natural for children, is to bring this triangle inside that one. And this is not an operation of symmetry. It is something different. It is also an action, but it is different. And so the notion of category was introduced to take care of this, to put words on something which in fact is not even mathematical, because we human beings are used to think in this way. So, what is a category? A category consists in, here I will not use the words of mathematicians because I don't want to make you afraid by technical words. So, a category consists in on the one hand, a collection of beings. So here the beings are just, for instance, the polyhedra in the plane. Let's say convex polyhedra in the plane. I consider all possible polyhedra in the plane. And then relations. So here, for instance, what I am thinking about, when I have, so relation, so beings here, so I will denote them by letters like that, and the relations are always, so are denoted in this way, they always go from one being to another being. So here, for instance, what I have in mind is the possibility to carry this polyhedron inside this one. And I decide that any transform of the plane which carries this into that is a relation between this being, this triangle, and that one. Okay, and what are the formal properties I can derive here? First, the fact that there is a composition law, exactly as in the theory of groups. But here you have to be careful. You cannot compose arbitrary relations. You can, if you have a relation from X to Y, and a relation from Y to Z, let's say U and V, then you can compose them. So here, think, suppose you have three, okay, here is the third polyhedron, and suppose that you send this inside that. Then you can certainly compose them. Okay, so this means that it is, you certainly may have a composition law like this. And by now you may ask, are there unit elements? Or is there a unit element? And you realize that in fact there is one unit element, one identity transform for any being. Okay, so for any X, there is, okay, so I don't write that, it is a mathematical, so for any X, there is a unit element, which I write Y(x), which is a relation from the being X to itself. And what are the properties? So here I have written the language. You see in the language, you have the word being here, the word relation, you have the composition law, and you have a special relation from any being to itself. Okay, this is the language. And by now, you have axioms. So what axioms are left here? So first, you still have associativity. Okay, suppose you have 4 beings, and okay, U, V, W. Okay, and then you can compose them in 2 ways. So first, you can compose W with composed of V and U, and you can also compose this composed transform, this composed relation, with U. And so the first axiom is that this property is verified. And now there is another axiom. For any X, the composed of one X with any U is equal to U. So here, in order for this to make sense, I need a U, which is a property from Y to X. And you also have that any V composed with 1X is equal to V. So here you are considering any relation from X to some Z. Okay, and that's all. So you see, this definition is not, it is in terms of length of data, it is almost the same as the definition of groups. Extremely simple definition. This definition was introduced by these people during the war, and after that they wrote more papers with other definitions derived from that one. And they did that because it corresponded to things they were used to see in mathematics, the fact to have composition laws and things like that. But you may have some element of surprise. In some sense, it seems too easy. And for instance, Eilenberg used to say that the most important Eilenberg is a very famous mathematician. But he used to say that his most important papers were papers without results. Just extremely easy definitions. So here's the definition of category I have stated without forgetting anything. And there is a derived definition I will not present, which is the notion of functor. Extremely simple definition. And, okay, so they wrote papers, and it has to be said that most mathematicians living in this period, most great mathematicians living in this period were quite skeptical about this notion. There is a famous statement by a great mathematician saying that you will not prove theorems repeating Why? Because usually in the theory of categories, the families of relations between two objects is denoted om. So he said, you will not prove theorems repeating om. But then, approximately 15 years after these people, came a mathematician, Alexandre Grothendieck, who understood how to use categories in a deep way, how to use this notion in a deep way. And in fact, in my opinion, not only in my opinion, Grothendieck is as important in the history of mathematics as Galois. So Galois has really changed mathematics, but Grothendieck also. The meaning of the word mathematics is not exactly the same after Grothendieck. Maybe not in all parts of mathematics, but in the parts of mathematics which have been influenced by his work. And in fact, Grothendieck tried to understand and to formulate everything in terms of categories. So in terms of this very simple notion. And in fact, he has learned whole new generations of mathematicians to use categories. And by now, there are whole parts of mathematics where people use categories all the time. For instance, it is you can also say that there are other parts of mathematics where people never use categories. But in fact, it is a question for me. Is it because the notion of category is not well adapted to these other parts of mathematics? Or is it because in these other parts of mathematics, Grothendieck did not learn people to use categories. When I say learn people, so it means to show people that categories can be used in a deep way. In fact, what Galois had done was that. From the start, Galois, in a few pages, Galois has shown people that groups are deep. He not only introduced the notion, but he immediately showed that there is something deep. For categories, it was different. You see, first there was a definition, and then 15 years later, or more, Grothendieck came and showed the mathematical community that this notion can be used in an extremely deep way. Okay, and so what I am saying to you is that this type, so I will not have time to talk about Grothendieck toposes, which in fact would be the next step after categories, just another natural development, all stemming from groups, in fact. You see, you go from groups to categories, and then from categories to toposes, but I have no time to talk about that. But you see that some very simple definitions may have extremely important consequences. But the problem is that for mathematicians, for scientists, it is extremely difficult to evaluate that. So you see, for instance, Eilenberg, he said he published his most important papers were papers without proof, papers without result. And so I wonder, would it be possible today for somebody like Eilenberg to publish a paper like that? I'm not sure, because people want results, and they want results with hard proof. Whereas, in fact, what is the most important thing in mathematics is not that, it is simple ideas. Because as Professor Zelmanov has said, what we are looking for is understanding. And sometimes some definitions, some concepts opens understanding in an incredible way. And so it may happen that, for instance, somebody tells you in mathematics about a new definition, and if this definition is new, it is extremely difficult for you to understand whether it can be fruitful or as important as that or not. We may ask for criteria. So, for instance, one criterion I propose is the fact that we have to recognize that in mathematics there are inspired people. Few of them. So certainly Grothendieck was inspired, Galois was inspired. And so, for instance, when somebody who you know is inspired proposes a new definition and tells you that he thinks it is extremely important, even if you don't understand, do not reject this idea. So, for instance, Grothendieck so he changed a whole part of mathematics, and then he was he had deception, because he could see that, in some sense, toposes were rejected by the mathematical community. And he was extremely bitter about that. Even rejected by the thousands of people who use every day what he has done. And so he wrote many pages about that. And so here, my opinion is that we have a criterion. When somebody like Grothendieck tells you something, even if you don't understand, take it seriously. Okay, so I would have other criteria to give, but by now my time is already gone. So